All right, what's going on, everyone? In this video, we're going to be building a IP address tracker using Vue 3 and the Composition API, Tailwinds for the styling, and also a plugin called Leaflet here for this map. Now, before we go ahead and get into building this application, I first want to run you through how it's going to work. Now, when we first load in here, you can see that we're going to have this empty input here, which is going to say we can search for any IP address, or we can also leave it empty to get the current IP address of the machine that you're running this application on. Okay, now once we submit that IP address, or we enter that IP address and we hit the search button here, what's going to happen is we're going to reach out to an API that's going to use that IP address and return us data or information on where that IP address is and a few other different statistics that we're going to display here on our screen. And we're also going to plot a marker on the map of that current location that the IP address is coming from. So let's go ahead and enter a IP address here of 8.8.8.8. Now this is actually a IP address of Google. So if I go ahead and hit this button right here, what's going to happen is, number one, we're going to have this pop-up here, which is going to have a few different details about this current IP address. So currently you can see we have the IP address right here. The location is California. The time is UTC minus, I believe 7, or I don't know how you really pronounce that, but it's -7. And then the ISP, which is the internet service provider, is Google LLC here. Okay, and then you can see right here, we have this marker that was generated right here on where the IP address based on the API that we're going to be using to get this information is telling us where it's coming from. Okay, so that's what we're going to be building here. So let's go ahead and get started. Now for this project, we will be using the Vue CLI to create our Vue app. Now this requires you to have Node.js installed on your system. Now, if you don't have Node installed on your system, or if you're unsure, what you can do is open up a terminal or a command prompt and type in the value of node-v. And if you can return a version here, that means you're all set and you don't need to worry about installing this. If you don't get anything returned here, then you're going to want to make sure you download Node and go through the installation steps to get that installed on your computer prior to starting this tutorial here. Now, one other thing I want to go ahead and mention is we're going to be using the Vue CLI, like I said, which you also have to install once you have Node.js on your system here. So in case you're unaware, if you have this installed as well, what you can do is in your terminal again, type in vue -- version here. And if you get returned this version right here, as you can see, I have a version number of 4.5.13. That means once again, you're all set and you don't have to worry about installing anything in order to complete this tutorial. Now, if you don't have this, what you need to do is you can see right here, you can run this npm install command inside of your terminal and it will go ahead and install the Vue CLI for you. Now, one last thing I want to mention here is if you are new to Tailwinds and don't have any experience using this CSS framework, I highly recommend you guys pause this video and checking out my video that I did a few weeks ago on building a modern landing page with Tailwind CSS, because I'm not going to get too in depth with the structuring, the classes, and all that within this video. If you want to learn more about that and follow along, I recommend you watching this video to get a little bit more insight on how Tailwinds works. But within this video, I will show you how to actually install Tailwinds and use it within Vue itself. Alright, so here in VS Code, I have an empty folder called IP Address Tracker. Now, we are going to be creating this project from scratch, but I do also have a GitHub repository linked down below in the description that has all the starting files if you don't want to walk through this process. And I also have the completed repository in a separate branch on that repo as well. All right, so first thing that we need to go ahead and do here is we're going to open up a new terminal. And what we want to do is we want to create our Vue application here. So to do this, we're going to type in the keyword here of Vue, then create, and then, if I can spell here, and then we want to give this project a name. So since I already have it in this folder of IP address tracker, all I'm going to do is give it the name of app here. Okay, so what's going to happen is it's going to then prompt you with this menu right here of Vue CLI, and you can see here I have all these presets that I have created for myself, and a few of them came with Vue CLI itself. Okay, so for this project, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom and I'm going to manually select the features here. So by default, we have a few selected for us. So we have Babel, and then we also have a linter/formatter. Now for this project, we're only going to need a few things. So number one we want is the router. So you can select that by hitting space over the selected version as highlighted. And we also want to use a CSS preprocessor. So I'm going to go over this and I'm going to hit space as well. And that's all we're going to need for this project. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here to go on to the next step. And then it's going to ask us what version do we want, and we're going to be using Vue 3. So I'm going to go down to here and I'm going to press enter. And then it's going to ask us here to use history mode for the router, and we're going to select yes. And then it's going to ask us which preprocessor we want to use, which in this case, for this project, I'm going to be using Node SAS, and I'm going to hit enter on this as well. And then I'm going to use all the defaults for the rest here. So we're going to use the first option here for the linter, and then we're going to do lint on save. Let me scroll down here. And for the preferred placing config, we're going to keep that as default, and we're going to say in dedicated config files here. And then you also have the option once you're done creating this to save this as a preset, but in my case I don't want to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and select no. And then from here it's going to actually go ahead and run through the process of creating our Vue application, which as you can see this will take a little bit, and once it is complete we'll move on to the next steps. Okay, so our Vue application has been successfully installed. We can see this if we head over to our app folder here and expand this, and you can see now we have all these files that were generated by the Vue CLI. Now what I want to do next is install all the additional dependencies that we need for our project here, such as Tailwind and also Leaflet. Now we need to go into our app folder here because that's where the package.json file is, and that's where you want to install our dependencies here. So we're going to do cd, and we're going to say app because that's the name of our folder here. Now to install Tailwind using Vue, we can say vue add and go Tailwind here. Now we should be prompted with this warning here about uncommitted changes. You may or may not see this, but if you do, just go ahead and select Y here and hit enter. And this is going to install our Tailwind plugin here. Now, we should be prompted a screen about what type of Tailwind config.js file do we want. And I'm going to go ahead and select the minimal or the default option here of minimal and select enter. And that should go ahead and generate these two files right here of post.cssconfig.js and also our tailwind.config.js. So with that command and our selection of minimal, we can now use Tailwind within our Vue project here. Okay, so lastly here, I'm just going to go ahead and clear this terminal, and we need to install our other dependency for our map of Leaflet. Now it's pretty simple. All we need to do is say npm I and do Leaflet here, and this is going to install, and that'll wrap it up for all the dependencies that we need here for our project. Now with that all out of the way, we're ready to begin here. So first off, what I want to do is start our local development server here for our Vue application. Now to do this, we need to head up to a terminal, select new terminal again, and we need to go into our app folder here. So we're going to say cd and go app, and we want to run the command npm run serve. And what this is going to do is start a local development server on our local host here. So we should see that appear right here once this is done building. And there we go. Okay, so we can now go ahead and click on our local host port 8081. And when we do so, we should be generated with this right here, which is the default Vue template that is created when you use the Vue CLI. So obviously we don't want any of this. We need to do a little bit of cleanup here. So we'll start off in our SRC folder here, and let's go ahead and begin by getting rid of our about view here. We don't need this anymore, so let's go ahead and delete that. And you'll see we'll start to get some errors here because we are importing that component in some other spots. So if you go to our router here to get rid of that error, we can, first off, we don't need our terminal, so I'm going to close that. We can remove this about path right here, since we're no longer using that view here anymore. And then we also have a component here of hello world, which we don't want as well. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that here. And we also need to get rid of that reference inside of our home view here. So we can get rid of it right here on the import. And we don't want the component or the image here as well. So we'll delete that. And then we also no longer have the need for this hello world component here inside of this object. Okay, and I believe we head over to our application now, we should have something like this. So the last portion we need to remove here is this navigation. Now that is found inside of our app.view, and this is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove actually just the nav. We're going to keep the router view. We do need that. And then lastly, we no longer have need for style tags because we're going to be using Tailwind to style everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all this, and that should do it for our cleanup. Now this application is going to have one route, and if we head back over to our files here and we go to our router folder and we go to the index.js, you can see that the route is right here. It has a path of /, the name is home, and the component is hooked up to home, which is this right here. So if we go back over to our browser here, you can see that the title of this page is app, and I want to change that. Now, you may be wondering, where is it getting the name of app from? And that's actually the name we created for our project when we ran our Vue CLI, which is right here of app. So to change this, what we can do is on our route here, we can add a new object of meta, and inside of here, I can add a title. Okay, now you can make this whatever you want, but this is going to be an IP address tracker, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a title of IP address tracker here, if I can type. Okay, now this alone will not change the title of our browser tab right here. You can see it still says app. What we need to do is we need to run a method called router.beforeEach here. Now this method takes in a few parameters. The first one is to, then we have from, and then we also have next, and then we run a callback function here. Okay, so what we want to do is for each route, before we go into that route, hence the name before each, we want to look at the document.title here. And we want to set it equal to here, and we're going to use interpolation, so I'm going to use backticks, and I'm going to use the money sign and our brackets here. Now we can get a hold of the current route that we're going to by referencing our to parameter here, and we want to get the meta, and we want to get the title inside of that meta object here. Okay, so if we save that, we still are missing one thing, which is going to be the next parameter right here. Okay, so this right here will go ahead and update our page title to whatever we have here inside of this meta object. So if we head back over to our browser now, you'll see that the title inside of our route here is IP address tracker. All right, so let's begin to populate our application here. So what we're going to start with first is going to be this section right here, which has our background image, it has our header, and also our input and our button. So what we can do here is where we have this div with the class of home, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to add a few classes here. So we want this to be display flex. We also want this to have a flex direction of column, so we'll pass it flex col. Now we also want this div right here to have a height of 100 VH, so we can pass the class of H screen here, but we also don't want to get in any larger than 100 VH, so we're going to pass it max H screen like that. Okay, now inside of this div we're going to have two separate children. We're going to have the search and the results, and then we're also going to have our map. Okay, so let's go ahead and put a comment here. We're going to have a one that says search/results, and inside here or under this comment we want to create a new div here. Now we want to pass this a few classes. So first off, we want to display this as flex. We want to have it justify all the content to the center, so we're going to say justify center. We want to have this have a position of relative. We are also going to give it padding on the left and right of 4. We're going to do a padding top here of 8, and also padding bottom of 32 here. Okay. Now, there's one thing that we need to do, which is add a background image to this div. Now, using Tailwinds, how we can do this is we need to go down to our config here, and we need to do a extend here. All right, so what I'm going to do is copy and paste this in. So inside of our extend object right here, we're going to open this up, and I'm going to paste this in. So what we're doing here is we have the background image. and we're running a callback. This is directly from the documentation here. And what we're doing is we have this class, or a class that we're creating. I can name this anything we want, but this is going to be called hero pattern, and we're setting it to this picture right here we have inside of our assets. Now, to get the same picture I'm using, I mentioned it earlier on, if you want to get the starting files from the repository, you can find that link down below in the description, and you'll be able to get this image in that repository as well. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time diving into Tailwinds and explaining how everything works under the hood, but just know that this right here will go ahead and allow us to use this class of hero pattern and apply this image right here to, or apply that image using this class right here. Okay, so we need to save that, and it should auto recompile here for us. So now if we head back over to our home view here, what we can do is we can actually apply this class. So now to add a background image here, and I'll do that right after relative, we say BG, and we gave that class name a class value of hero dash pattern here. Okay, and I also want to pass in one more class of BG dot cover, which will set the background size to cover here. So if we save that and we head over now onto ours, you can see we have this image right here. All right, so that's looking good. Now, the next thing we need to do is, let me go ahead and just shrink this up a little bit, and we'll go inside of this div here. So we'll just do a few line breaks. Now we want to create our search input and our headings. So I'll do another comment here to kind of separate some things out here. So we'll say search input. Now what we'll do is create another div here, and this will have a class of width full. And we also want to set a max width on this div. So what we're going to do is actually use one of the breakpoints here. So we're going to say max dash W screen, and we want to set it equal to the small breakpoint here. So what this is going to do is it's going to give it a width of 100%, but we're also going to make the max width equal to the small breakpoint, which I believe is about 760 pixels. Okay. Now inside of here, we're going to have our H1, and this is going to say IP address tracker, and I, for some reason, capitalized that. And we want to add a few classes here. So we're going to say we want to give this a font color of white, so we'll say text white. We want to align this text to the center, so we'll pass it a class of text center, and we'll increase the text size here to 3XL. And we'll give it a padding bottom of 4 here. All right. Now, inside of here, or inside of this div below the H1, we want to have another div here with a class of flex. Now, inside of here, we're going to have our input and our icon for our search here. So if we go over here, we're going to be creating this and also have this icon right here. All right. So let's head back over to our code. And inside of here, we're going to have our input. And let's see here. What we want to do is we want to pass this a class, and we're going to say flex1 to make it take up all the space inside of this div right here. Then we're going to give it a padding on the top and bottom of 3. We're going to say padding on the left and right of 2. We want to round our corners of our input, but we only want to do the top left and the bottom left, because as you can see here on our finished demo, we're going to have the roundedness on our actual button here on the right, our top right and bottom right. We don't want to round this and this right here. Okay, so we'll say rounded top left, or TL for short, and we'll do medium. And we'll do the same thing. We'll say rounded, but this time bottom left, so BL and medium. And then one last thing I want to do is whenever we have a input here, you'll see that when we hover over it or go inside of it, we get this nasty outline here, which I don't like. I don't think anybody that does styling think this looks good, so I want to remove that. Now, how we can remove that is because that only appears when you're on the state of focused, or you're focused on the input. So we can actually target a focus state with Tailwinds by saying focus, colon, and then we want to define the property that we want to change, and that should be focus. And we want to say outline here and set this equal to none. Okay, so now if we hover over this or scope in on it, Did I do that wrong? F-O, I spelled that wrong. C-U-S there, and now it should work. So if we go back inside of here and we refresh it, if we try to go inside of here, you can see that it no longer has that blue outline on the input here. Okay. So let's go ahead and actually add a placeholder here, and I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in to save some time. It's quite lengthy. So let me grab this here and we'll paste that in. So we're going to say search for any IP address or leave it empty to get your IP info. Now later on, when we actually start to create our JavaScript, we'll hook up a V model to this input to capture the user's input, and then we're going to use that input to reach out to our API and get the address info for whatever value the user placed inside of this text field here. Okay. Now the next thing we need to do is get our icon. Now for our icon, how we're going to achieve, or how we're going to get it, is through a library called Font Awesome here. So if you head over to cdnjs.com, I'll link it down below in the description. We're going to go ahead and copy this link tag right here. Now since we're using Vue, what we need to do is we need to import this script tag. Where we're going to do that is inside of our public folder here, and we're going to go to our index.html. And right below this link tag, I'm going to copy and paste in the link tag from cdnjs.com. Okay, so now we can have access to use the Font Awesome library inside of our project here. So what we want to do is head over to Font Awesome here, and I already have this pulled up. We're going to be using the chevron right icon. So I'm going to copy this HTML right here, and we're going to head back over to our code, and just below our input here, I'm going to copy and paste in that class here. So if we head back over to our application here, if I refresh it, we should be able to see now we have our chevron right here. But obviously we need to do some styling to it, so let's go ahead and address that. Now some classes that we're going to add here is, first off, I want to do cursor pointer, which is going to apply a cursor pointer to this icon. We want to give it a background of black. I want to make the text white. So when we use Font Awesome, you can change the color of the actual icon using the font color property. So we're going to pass the text white to make that white. Now I want to go ahead and give it some padding on the left and right. So we'll say px, and we're going to pass it a value of 4. Now, like I mentioned before, we rounded the top left and the bottom left to medium here on our input. Now for this icon, what we're going to do is we're going to say top right, so TR, and we're going to do BR here. Okay. Now we also want to, and I probably can do some line breaks here to make this look a little bit better. Let's go ahead and do some of those here. I think it's starting to look a little bit long, so I feel doing a line break or two here will make this look a little bit more cleaner and hopefully make it a little less easier to read. Or a little easier to read, not less. So we also want to add the class of flex here to our icon, and we want to align the icon to the center, so we're going to give it another class here of items center. And that should do it for our icon, and it should also do it for our search input here. So I'm just going to go ahead and collapse this right here. And let's head over to our browser and take a look at what we have. So as you can see, this is what we're left with so far. And if we go to inspect it to check it out on mobile, it should all be fairly responsive because we did add a padding to the left and right of 4 here on this div that's wrapping our search input here. So as we shrink it down, it should still look good on a mobile device. Now, when a user searches for an IP address, we're going to display this component right here, which is going to have all the info for that particular address, including the address itself, the location, time zone, and also the ISP. So let's go ahead and begin to work on implementing this into our project. Now, first thing we want to go ahead and do is create a new component here. We're going to say new file, and we're going to call this ipinfo.vue. And we can start off with our boilerplate here by saying view and doing that. Now we are using Tailwind, so we have no need for our style tag here. And let's go ahead and begin by having an empty div right here. Now, before we begin doing any markup, I want to actually import this component into our home view here. Now, to do this, what we first need to do is in our script tag, we need to import the component. So we're going to say import, and we'll say IP info. Now you can name this anything you want, but it makes sense to keep the consistency here to the name of the file that we created here. Okay. And we'll say from, and we'll go out of there into our components folder, and we'll look for IP info. Now, once we have this imported, we need to actually, inside of our export default, go ahead and paste it here inside of our components. And now we can actually use this inside of our view here. Okay. So where we're going to use this is inside of this div that we have labeled here as search/results. And we're going to go right below our search input here. And I'll go ahead and add a new comment here to keep things consistent and organized. We'll say IP info, and we'll go ahead and paste this into our view here. And now if we had anything inside this component, if we went over to our actual application here, we should be able to see that, but we have nothing in there. So let's go ahead and work on actually populating this. Now let's go ahead and add a class to our wrapper here. Now we are positioning the div right here of search results to relative. So we want to take this component out of the normal order that it would be in and position it absolute to a specific spot on the page, because as you can see right here, we have it below hanging in between our image and our map. So to do that, we need to position our component here absolute. So we'll say absolute here for our first class. And what we want to do is, I'm going to do this actually with some spaces here to keep things a little bit more easier to read, because we're going to have a few classes here, and we want to position this on the bottom but below it. So we want to say negative. Now to do that with Tailwind, you say minus, and we can say bottom, and we're going to pass a value of 64 here. Now on large screens, what we want to do is have it be negative bottom, and we're going to say 20, because we are going to be using some media queries here. So to do that, we're going to say large, because on larger screens and above, we want it to be negative bottom 20, but any other screen, we're going to say negative bottom 64. Now we're also going to display this as flex, and we want it initially to be a flex column, meaning that it goes up and down. But once we get to a large screen here, we want to have it in a flex row. So we'll say flex, and we'll do row here. Now the color of the background is going to be white, so we'll say BG white. And we want to add some gap in between our items here, so we're going to say gap Y, and we're going to set that to 4, -4. We're also going to do a gap on the X, or on the left and right, and we're going to say 12. And then we're going to have padding on the left and right here on the whole thing. We're going to specify that value to be 8, and we're also going to do padding top to 8, and we'll do padding bottom, and we'll put that to 12. And then we want to round this, so we're going to say round it MD here. Okay, so there we go. And that's going to be all of the classes for our wrapper here. Now, if we open up this div in here, we can actually start with our flex items. So I'll go ahead and do a new comment here, and we'll say flex item number 1 here. All right. Now in here, we're going to have our div, and these are all going to be the same. So for all 4 flex items, I'm going to do one, then copy and paste them down for the additional 3. So first off, we're going to have a class of flex and flex column here. All right. Now we're going to have an H3 inside of here that's going to contain the actual label, and we'll say the first one's going to be IP address here, and we'll add a few classes here. So we'll say class, and we'll do text extra small. We'll do a margin bottom to push it away from our actual content of 2, and we want this to be the text to be uppercase, so we're going to say uppercase here. All right. And then below this, we're going to have a span, and we're going to pass this a class of text to XL here. And what we're going to do later on is we want to dynamically set this value based on the result of our API. But for now, we'll just hard code this in here. So we'll say 8.8.8.8, which is the IP address for Google. Okay, it doesn't really matter. So that's going to be our general structure for our flex items here. So I'm going to copy this down 1, 2, 3 more times. And then let's just go through here and say item number 3, or sorry, that'll be 2. And then we'll say 3, and then we'll do 4. And then we'll change our labels here. So we'll do location. We'll do, let's see here, time zone. And then also the ISP. All right. Now let's go ahead and change this. So we'll change location. We'll do, it doesn't really matter. We'll do Michigan. That's where I'm from. And we'll do time zone here. We'll say UTC -7 100 here. I believe it's 0 in front of that. And then the ISP will just say Google. All right, so now if we were to head over to our actual project here, we should see that we don't have that. And why don't we? Are we getting an error of some sort? Let me check here. I believe we probably would be. Let's see here. Oh, it's down here for some reason. What would be the reason for that? So it appears that I went ahead and misspelled relative here on our div for search/results, which is why our component here of IP info is in the wrong position. So if we were to go ahead and update this, that should go ahead and resolve our issue here with it being positioned in the wrong spot. So let's go ahead and check out our application now. And there you go. It is now positioned in the correct spot. And as you can see, we are on a screen that is smaller than the large breakpoint. So right now, our component is in the flex column direction. But if we were to go ahead and expand this, you can see once we get past that breakpoint, it'll go ahead and convert into a flex row. So the final thing that we need to implement here into our project is going to be our map from Leaflet. Now, in order to implement this, we also need an access token from a site called Mapbox here. So as you can see, I already have an account. I already have a public token, but if you don't have an account with Mapbox, just pause video here. I have the link down below in the description. It's very simple, easy, and free to create an account. And once you do that, you should be given a default public token like you see here on my screen right now. All right, so once you have that, feel free to continue on with this tutorial. Now, in order to implement this here, or our map, I have open here the Leaflet Quick Start Guide here to implement our map. And it's actually quite simple, but I'll walk you through the process here. Now, first off, what I want to do is head back over to our code here and do a few things first. So we need to import here Leaflet from Leaflet, which we went ahead and installed earlier when we created our project. Now, what I also want to do is create our setup option here. So we'll say setup because we are going to be using the composition API here. Okay, and I'm going to leave that like that. Now let's head back over to the documentation here. So the first thing that we need to do is include the Leaflet CSS file into the head section of our document. Now, even though we imported it with npm, we still need to include this link tag right here with the styling for Leaflet itself. So what we're going to do is copy this code. We're going to head back over to our actual project here, and inside of the index.html in the public folder, very similar to how we did our font awesome link tag, we're going to go right below that and we're going to paste in this link tag from Leaflet here. Okay, and that's all we need to do. Now, since we did import this with npm, we no longer need to do this because we're actually importing it in within our component here, so we don't need to do this. Now, the next thing we need to do here is actually put a div element with a certain ID where you want your map to be. So I'm just going to copy this code here and I'm going to keep the ID the same. We're going to come back over to our home component here and I'm going to close this right here. We're going to come a few line breaks from our search results div. I'm going to put a new comment, we'll say map, and I'll paste in that code right here. Now, in addition to the ID, I want to apply some styles here from Tailwind. So we're going to say H full, and we're also going to say Z10 here. And we also forgot to put the Z index of 20 here on this one. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we have our IP info component right here. And as you recall, it overlays between the actual image and our map. So in order for it to not get cut off by the map, we need to define a Z index of a lower value opposed to this so that it goes over the top of it. So hopefully that makes sense here. Okay, and that's all the styling that we're going to need to do here. So if we head back over to the documentation here, so we already covered this because we added some height styling to our map ID, so we don't need to do this. So now at this point, we're ready to initialize the map and do some stuff with it, apparently. So if we scroll down here, you can see the first thing we need to do is actually create the map. So by default, the center is going to be of London. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a little bit differently here. So since we're using the composition API, all the code inside of this setup option is going to run prior to everything else completing, before created, before everything. So if we did it like this, if we just copy and paste this code in here like this, it's not gonna have access to this map ID yet, so we can't do that. But what we can do is we can go ahead and do this. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this here. And we're going to create a new variable here called let's see here what I call it, my map here. And we're going to leave that to an empty variable for now. Okay, now we can get access to all of this here in the lifecycle hook of mounted. Now, as opposed to using mounted with the options API, when you use a composition, you need to specify and you say on mounted here. Okay, and then we run a callback. Now, in order to use this, we have to import it here. So what we need to do is we're going to say import, and we'll do on mounted, and we'll say from view like that. So now we can use this. So once the application has been mounted to the DOM, we can then get access to this ID right here. So then we can go ahead and run this code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, remove it, open up our mounted cycle here, and I'm going to paste that in here. Now we have it with this value of L, but we named it leaflet here. So what I'm going to do is copy this, and I'm going to paste it there instead. Okay, so if we head over to our application now, I don't think we're going to see anything just yet. My map is assigned a value but never used. Oh, you know what? We need to, let me see here. Okay, so that error is fine because we still need to do one more thing, and then we should resolve that error of this not being used. So over in our documentation, one last thing we need to do is add what we call a tile layer to our map here. So all I'm going to do is copy this code right here. We're going to head back over to our code, and inside of our mounted lifecycle hook here, I'm going to go ahead and do a few line breaks. I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so once again, we want to replace this L with leaflet here. And then what we're going to do is we need to actually use our own access token here. So this is where we're going to need to head over to Mapbox and grab that access token that you should have when you create your account. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go over here. It's going to copy this like that. So a few places that we need to go ahead and import it. Number one is in this API right here. So we're going to go ahead and remove this and paste in that token. Save that. And then we're also going to paste that token right here. Okay. So fingers crossed. Now if we head back over to our project here, we should now see, if we refresh, hopefully a working map, and we do. And we can scroll through this, and right now it's currently in the center of London, but we'll go ahead and change that. But we have now successfully went ahead and implemented Leaflet into our project here. Now that we have finished implementing everything here into our project, let's go ahead and begin to set up the ability for a user to enter an IP address here into this input field. And then we want to take that IP address and make an API call to populate this component right here of all of our IP information. Now, in addition to that, we're also going to be plotting a marker here on the map and also recentering the map around that current marker's location. All right. Now, in order to get all this information on the IP, we're going to be using a free API called IP Geolocation API. Now, in order to use this, even though it is free, you do need to sign up for a free account. And I believe you get up to 1,000 requests a day on the free version, which would be very sufficient for our tutorial here today. Now, if you scroll down here, you can see that the output format looks like this. Now, we're only going to be using a few values here from the output, but if you wanted to extend this application, you can see that there is a lot more to it that is returned from each IP address. All right, so if you are looking for the API key once you have created an account, what you need to do is head up to the navigation bar right here, and you can see my name. So click on this. We're going to go to my subscriptions, and you can see right here that your personal API key should be right here, which we're going to use inside of our API call. Now, I do want to mention that we're going to be making the call on the front end, exposing our API key, which is fine for this tutorial, but as a best practice, this is meant to be run on a server side so that you don't expose your API key. So I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. Now, if you don't already have an account, I would suggest you guys pause this video, create your account, and then return to this video once you have your account created and your API key. Okay, so to make our API call here, I'm going to be using a package called Axios. Now, you're more than welcome to use Fetch, but I just prefer to use Axios. Now, when we first created our project, we did not go ahead and install this dependency. So let's go ahead and do that here. So let's open up a new terminal here. We're going to cd into our app, and we're going to say npm I and say Axios here. And that's going to go ahead and install Axios here for us to use inside of our project. Now with that installed, let's go ahead and close out of our terminal here as we're no longer going to need it. So the first thing that I want to go ahead and do here is set up the ability to capture our user's input. Now, how we would do that using the options API is we would set up a data value and then we would hook up a V model to our input here. Now it works a little bit differently here inside of the composition API. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a variable here and we're going to call this query IP. Okay, and we're going to be using a ref here. Now you could also use reactive, and ref and reactive are ways to make your data values here inside of the composition API reactive, but I prefer to use ref over reactive, and there's a few different reasons why, but I don't want to go ahead and get into that here in this video. So just know we're going to create our data here using ref. Okay, so by default what I want to go ahead and do is actually set this equal to a empty string. Now in order to use ref inside of our composition, or inside of the composition API, we have to also import it just like we did our on-mounted lifecycle hook here. So I'll just put a comma and we'll say ref, and that'll give us the ability to use it inside of our setup option here. Okay, so what I also want to do is we'll save that. Now in order to use this variable here inside of our template and be able to hook up a V model to it, we need to return this value here at the very end of our setup option. So I'll do a return value here and we'll say query IP. And now I can come up to our input here and we'll do a V model and we'll say query IP. So now we're able to capture whatever a user types in and it's going to be stored inside of this constant here of query IP. Now I also want to create one more data value here, and this is going to be called const IP info, and this is going to store all the info that we get returned from our API. Now by default I want to set this to null, and we also need to return it here inside this return statement. Now what we're going to do with this is if we go over to our application here, and let me just refresh that. There we go. Now you can see here initially when we don't have anything, inside of the input field, or we haven't searched anything, our actual component here is hidden until we actually search for a IP address. So if I type this in here, and then you can see this will show up. Now what we can do is we can use this data value right here of IP info, and we can toggle whether or not we show this based on the value of this IP info right here. So if it's set to null initially, then we will do a vif on here. So we can say vif, and we only want to show this if IP, and I should really probably lowercase that I. It was something was standing out wrong to me there. So we want to say if IP info is true. So if we head over to our application now, you should see that this is going to be hidden until that actual value has value. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense here. Now to make our API call, we need to create a function in order to do that. Okay, so how we can create a function, normally inside of the options API you would do this inside of methods, but within the composition API here we can actually just simply create a function and do all of the logic inside of there and then return it. And then what we're going to do is when a user clicks on the button right here, or the eye icon, then we'll go ahead and run that function. So for this function, let's go ahead and call it const get IP info, and we're going to be using async and await here to go ahead and await for the data to be returned before we do anything. So we'll say async, and we'll do our callback function here. Now inside of our function here, we're going to start off with our try and our catch block. So what this is going to do is it's going to try to reach out to the API, and if it encounters any errors, then we're going to catch it and we'll do something with that error here. So we'll say try, and then we'll do catch. I actually want to accept a param on here, and we'll say alert the error.message here. Okay, and then inside of our try block, what we want to go ahead and do is first off, we're going to be using Axios to make our API call here. So we need to import that here into our component. So we'll say import, and we'll do Axios from and Axios here. Okay, so let's go ahead and first create our variable to hold the actual request. And so we'll say const data equals await. and we want to say Axios, and we're going to do a GET request here. Now let's head over to our documentation for this API. So we'll do API docs right here, and you can see this is the actual GET request here we want to go ahead and pass. All right, so let's go ahead and head back to our function here. So let me actually exchange these quotes for backticks, because we're going to be doing some interpolation with our actual data values here. So you can see here that currently the API key is probably, is that the right one I already have? Let me see. It might be, let me see, it might be using my one from my profile already, which would be pretty cool if it was, and it is. Okay, so we don't need to do anything there. But now you can see here for the IP address, you want to have it set so that it goes and looks at the current query IP address that a user could type in. So to do that, we're going to use interpolation here. So let's remove this. We'll do money sign, and we'll do our brackets here, and we're going to say query IP. Now, when we're using the composition API, we just can't specify query IP. We have to say query IP and then say .value here to actually get the value of whatever the user has typed in. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And then what we want to do is we want to come down here and get another variable here, and we're going to say result. And we're going to say this is equal to data.data here, okay? And just for now, let's go and just console or log us out of the console to see if everything is working as it should here. So we'll do console.log, and we'll say result here. All right, so what we need to do is, as you can see here, we need to return this function inside of this return statement here at the bottom of our setup option here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come up to our icon here, and we're going to attach a click listener here. So we're going to say at click, and then we want to run this function of get IP info here. So if we head back over to our application here, and you can see must use .value to read. Is that still wrong? Let's see here. What do we do wrong? I thought I did type in value. I typed it wrong again. There we go. Okay, I've been having trouble typing that lately. So that should fix that there. So let's go ahead and open up our console here. And if we go to our console here, now if I type in an IP address of 8.8.8.8, you should see when we click this here, hopefully we get return our data, and we do. So you can see here we have the IP, and then we have the location and everything that was specified here if we go back to the docs in this output format right here. So that is all working great. Now that we know that things are functioning correctly here, let's go ahead and remove this console.log statement. We really don't need it any longer. And let's go ahead and set our IP info here to all of the information that we want to collect from the API return result. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say IP info dot value here, and we're going to set this equal to an object here. Now what we want to go ahead and do is we're going to specify address here, and this is going to be result.ip. We're going to have our state here, and this will be the results.location, because we got to go inside of that location object, and we're going to say region. We're also going to get the time zone here, and it's going to be result.location.time zone here. And then we're also going to get the ISP. So we'll say result.isp, because that was not inside of the location object. And there we go, add that final P. Now the last two things we need to get returned are going to be the latitude and the longitude here. So we'll say LAT, and this will be result.location.lat. And then finally we'll say LNG, or we'll say long. We'll say, LNG, that's fine. And we'll do result.location, and we'll say LNG here. Okay, so now that we have this specified inside of this value here, we can now use this information and we can bind it to this component right here, and then dynamically update this component to display the correct information here. So let's say we'll do a vbind here, so v-bind, and we'll do IP info is equal to IP info here. Now we could do the shorthand here and just do colon, but I wanted to explicitly show you how we would do a vbind here in case you're newer to Vue and you didn't understand the shorthand. So this will work and this will also work, but I'll just leave it as that for right now so that if you are newer to Vue, this makes sense. So let's head over to our component here of IP info. And we need to go ahead and accept this prop. So we do this the same way as we've always have with the options API. We'll say props here, and we'll set it to an array, and then we'll say, I believe it was IP info like that. So what we want to go ahead and do here is inside of our span text here, let's go ahead and dynamically set these values here. So we'll say IP info, and the first one will be address here. And to save some time, I'm just going to copy this in here and we'll paste it along. There we go. And we'll keep that UTC right there because we want to keep that as the API doesn't specify that. So for the next one, it's going to be ipinfo.state. And then we'll have time zone here. And then lastly, we'll have the ISP here. So let's go ahead and save this and test it out here. So if we go back to our application, let's go ahead and refresh this here. And let's type in an IP address here. So 8.8.8.8. And let's go ahead and hit enter here. And we should hopefully see that we get this return right here. So we have the IP address, the location's California, the time zone is UTC -7, and then the ISP is Google LLC. So that is all working great. Okay, so the last portion of our function that we need to complete is the ability to update our map with a marker and also recenter based on the current location of this lat and longitude that are returned from our API here. So if we head back over to our documentation on Leaflet here, you can see that we can add a marker really easily to our map with this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code right here, and we're going to head back over to our function here. And just after we set the IP info here, let's go ahead and paste this in. Okay, so like we did before, this is going to be Leaflet like that. Now, instead of specifying the actual hard-coded values here, what we want to do is actually use our new value of lat and long here inside of the IP info object. Okay, so what we'll do here is replace 51 with IP info dot value, and we'll say dot lat, and then I'll just copy this like this, and then we'll paste it over here, but we'll say LNG. Okay, and then we're going to add that, so we're going to call the add to method and say my map. Okay, so that'll go ahead and add a marker to our map. Now what we also want to do is reset the view, because currently we may be going across the United States, across the world, and we won't see the marker if the map is not centered where the current actual location is. So let's go ahead and come to our mounted lifecycle lookup here, and let's just go ahead and copy this right here where we're actually setting the view here. So what we want to do is we're going to copy this and paste it in right below here, but we just want to go ahead and do, let's see here, we're going to say my map, and we're going to call the set view method here because we already have initialized our map. We don't want to redo that again. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this value right in here and replace it with this right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, what I also want to do is change out the initial starting point of our map here. So I'm going to use a latitude and longitude that is more closer to where I live. So let's go ahead and paste that in here because currently it's in London and I'm not in London, so it doesn't really make sense to put it there. And I also want to have the map be zoomed out a little bit more, and that's what this other value right here after the comma is. This controls the map zoom. So initially I want to go ahead and set this to 9. Okay, and then we're going to keep it at 13 when we do our zoom in or when we do our call with this function here. Okay, so with that saved, let's go ahead and test this out. So now we should be return our IP info like we were, but now we should also see a marker appear on our map, and also the map should recenter to the current location. So let's head back here refresh to make sure everything's up to date, and let's try this again. So first off, you can see that now the map is more in Detroit, and let's not go too far in here. So you can see now the map is more centered around Detroit, which is in the United States if you're watching this. So we'll say 8.8.8.8. So this should take us over to the California area. So let's go ahead and click search here. And you can see that this still appeared here, so all the information is correct. And now we are having a marker appear here around the current location of our IP address. And if we zoom out here, you should see that we are actually in California. So that is all working as it should. All right, so I did want to mention one more thing here before we wrap this video up, because I didn't want to do it here on camera, but if you leave this input field empty and you click search, which is why we left it as an empty string here inside of our actual code here when we created this value here, it'll actually return you the current IP address of your machine, and everything will set here on the map to your current location. So that's pretty cool, but I don't want to go ahead and expose all the information here on this video, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that, but hopefully you guys did enjoy this tutorial and this video. If you guys did, be sure to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you guys are new here to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.